few countries matter more to fertilizer markets than Russia, and sanctions could send shockwaves through supplies worldwide. Add in China's export push, a fast approaching U.S. application season, and farmer struggles. And the question becomes, where does the market go from here? I'm Johanna Bota, and here to help us make sense of it all is StoneX's VP of Fertilizer, Josh Linville. Good morning, Josh. I want to start by breaking down step by step what global sanctions against Russia could mean for fertilizer markets. So let's begin with urea, because Russia is by far the world's largest exporter.
Yeah, and this is something we've been watching very, very closely. And I think it's very important that we point out there are different layers to what these sanctions could mean. We could have a situation where, frankly, nothing happens. We could sit there, we could talk about it, we could worry about it, fret about it, and absolutely nothing happens. And you could go all the way down to the other side where all of a sudden the world is basically forced, whether it's because it's a willing partner of the US and the West or an unwilling because it's scared of the sanctions that might start getting imposed on them if they do business with Russia and everything in between. So we want to make sure that when we're talking about this, we are talking about a sanction that starts reducing Russian exports significantly. It's a low probability event, but a massively, massive, impactful situation on the world. So, yeah, when you start to look at urea, they have become the world's largest single exporter in the world. It's not even a close second. So when we start to talk about this and you look around the globe, yes, there are direct situations if all of a sudden these flows start to slow down, and this is going to be extremely impactful. Some of the biggest buyers in the world. But then you looked indirectly, you start thinking about how tight the global S&D is. If we start lowering their numbers, it doesn't matter if you buy directly from Russia or not. A tighter S&D means higher prices, and that's something farmers around the world can ill afford.
What about UAN? What does it look like if the U.S. alone sanctions Russia?
So this is where it gets real. I was very say fun. I don't think fun is the right word we want to be using for this. But Russia used to be the world's largest UAN exporter. They were the biggest one out there, and they have fallen to second on the list. They actually sit behind the U.S., and that's because they've lost access to most of their demand around the world. Globally speaking, UAN is a relatively small product, and you look at it, liquid is a hard product to move. It is a hard product to apply, and that's why you see so many countries depending on dry products. It's a much easier product to move and apply to the fields. So after the invasion, countries like Australia and Canada, and eventually a lot of Europe, basically stepped forward and said, we're not going to stand for this. We are going to start blocking Russian goods, which meant that Russian UAN could no longer flow into their countries. The US has become one of the last basically major demand destinations for Russia, and they've had to lower their export rate, had to lower their production rate because of this lack of options around the world. So again, even if just the US goes ahead with these sanctions, that means Russian exports are likely going to fall dramatically. The global S&D gets that much tighter because of a single move by the US. It doesn't need to be a global sanction against Russia. US alone is going to be enough to make that thing upend itself.
And what about ammonia? Because Russia lost access to its main export pipeline through Odessa when the war began and has struggled ever since to rebuild those flows.
Yeah, this is one of those things we learned very shortly after the invasion began. Russia was the world's largest. They were exporting a little bit over 4 million tons, 4.5, basically a nice round number. And when you looked at it, when you look at the list, the second place exporter, very low compared to what Russia was. But yeah, Russia would normally produce those anhydrous tons within Russian territory, and they would utilize a pipeline that went through the east and the south of Ukraine. It'd spit out around the Odessa region. They'd move it through a facility. That facility would load ships, which would sail around the world. And this worked for years and years and years. Turns out when you invade a country, they're not real keen on allowing those flows to continue. So since that time, they have fallen way down the list. Now they have been building new facilities, new infrastructure to move more tons within Russia out to the rest of the world. But with this war continuing to rage on, those export flows just haven't been there. And hydrogen is obviously a very dangerous substance when it gets into the air. And so the government's not real keen on trying to get these tons out there just yet. They want to wait for peace. But this is another situation where if there are sanctions, there will be an impact. There are several hundred thousands of tons of anhydrous that are still departing Russia, but it's not what it would have been several years ago.
Okay, let's move on to phosphates now. Russia is only the world's fourth largest exporter. So what impact, if any, will it have?
Yeah, this is one when you show the graphs, everybody like, oh, they're just the fourth biggest. It's not that big a deal. And at some other markets, if it was a more robust market, you'd be absolutely right. The problem with phosphate, 5 countries around the world control 85 to 90% of production and export capacity. So we're already dealing with a situation where you see China's second on that list. They are normally number one with 8 to 10 million tons exported. If all of a sudden you start removing Russia from that list, if you start to impact their export flows, there isn't a farmer in the world that isn't going to have some sort of an effect of the fallout.
And finally, potash. Russia is the world's second largest exporter, so any disruption there would be significant. What kind of impacts should we expect?
Again, you're talking about a much, much tighter global S&D. If you start to reduce their export volumes, you create less supply. You create more competition for that less supply. And in fact, the ongoing war has continued to delay some of the expansion projects that they had put into place, that they had planned for. So not only could there be a further impact, it's actually causing the situation to delay, removing more supply that we had expected in our global S&D as we look forward.
Recently, we've seen China's August data show solid urea and phosphate exports. If the U.S. moves ahead with sanctions on Russian fertilizer, how important could China's role be in filling that gap?
It's one of those situations. It's very, very hard to even verbalize how important that would be. Because if you start to remove Russia, I mean, you look at it, they are a major player on every single major product out there. Now, for China, they're a major player for phosphate and urea. But if, this situation where we start to have these exports starting to pick back up again, it's allowed the market to weaken a little bit. We've started to see a little bit of trepidation on these long positions saying, well, China's back to exporting. I'm going to scale back a little bit. I'm not going to be quite as bold on my price ideas. So as long as they remain in the market, it's a great, great situation for buyers. It's a great problem to have. Unfortunately, again, with most things that comes with the Chinese government, we just have no idea how long it's going to last or what it's going to look like even a month, 2, 3 months down the road.
And before we let you go, one more thing. North America's fall application season is just weeks away, starting around November 1st. How good or bad is demand likely to be, given the pressure farmers are under?
Yeah, if it wasn't for this price pressure, we'd be looking at this fall and saying it's going to be a major run. We're expecting a major corn crop once again for 2026 that requires a lot of fertilizer across the broad spectrum to get that soil ready to plant the crop next spring. We would be expecting, a lot of participation out there. We'd be expecting a lot of everything starting to pop up out here. But the problem is farmer economics are extremely poor. And you feel it in every article out there. You feel it in every conversation. These guys are struggling more than they have struggled in a very, very long time. You're actually starting to see some very light comparisons to the 80s. We're nowhere near that time frame, but that just gives you a sense of how poorly they are doing today. And so that's one of the big questions we have. We know the demand is there, but is the farmer resolved? Is the farmer going to be willing to spend that money in the fall, or do they drag their feet until the spring? And I think it's going to be a situation where every single farmer is going to have a little bit of a different take on it. So this fall, a lot of questions still remains to be seen, but we got to see what happens here over the next 45, 60 days.
Josh, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you to our viewers for watching. For more financial content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.